The first night I stayed at the foster home, I noticed a young girl standing outside my window. She stared at me, unblinking, all night. My foster mom told me no one could have been there. The ground outside was overgrown and inaccessible. But every night she'd return, her face pressed against the glass, her eyes begging me for help. It was a cold, damp night in October when I arrived at the rambling Victorian house. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a stark contrast to the sterile, antiseptic smell of the orphanage I'd just left. Mrs. Whitaker, my new foster mother, was a woman of austere features and a perpetually pinched expression, but she greeted me with a forced warmth that sent shivers down my spine. My room was on the second floor, overlooking a tangled, overgrown garden. It was a large, dimly lit space with peeling wallpaper and a musty odor. I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling that settled in my gut, focusing on the promise of a fresh start, a chance for a family. But that night sleep eluded me. Just as the moon cast long, eerie shadows across my room, I saw her. A young girl, no older than 10, her face pale and gaunt, stood pressed against the windowpane. Her eyes, wide and dark, seemed to pierce through the glass, fixated on me. She didn't smile, didn't move, just stared. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, a sense of dread that chilled me to the bone. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But the girl remained, her silent presence a haunting, unnerving reality. I lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, watching her through the night. The next morning, I told Mrs. Whitaker about the girl. Her face tightened, a flicker of something cold and unnerving crossing her features. "Nonsense, dear," she said, her voice brittle. "There's no one out there. The ground is far too overgrown. No one could possibly get near the house." But the girl returned. Night after night she was there. Her silent, unwavering gaze a constant reminder of the unseen presence that haunted the house. Her eyes, they seemed to plead, to beg for something. Help? Release? I started to notice other things. Whispers in the halls when I was alone, fleeting shadows in the periphery of my vision. The temperature in the house would drop suddenly, a chill that seeped into my bones despite the crackling fire in the hearth. Mrs. Whitaker, she seemed quieter, more withdrawn, her eyes perpetually shadowed with worry. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what this girl wanted. I crept to the window, my heart hammering in my chest. The girl was there, her face illuminated by the moonlight. She seemed closer, the glass shimmering with a misty film. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She didn't answer, but her eyes widened, a flicker of desperate hope replacing the vacant stare. She moved her lips, trying to speak, but no sound came out. I felt a surge of compassion, a desperate need to understand her plight. I knew I had to help her, whatever the consequences. The following days were a blur of frantic research, whispered conversations with the other foster children, who, oddly, all dismissed my stories as childish imaginings, and furtive glances at old, dusty books in the attic. The house, I discovered, had a dark history. A young girl named Alara had died there decades ago, allegedly drowned in the well in the garden. The stories said she was a troubled child, ostracized and abused. The pieces started to fall into place. The girl at my window, Alara. The whispers, the shadows, the cold, they were all connected. Alara, trapped between worlds, desperately seeking a release. But what kind of release? The night Alara's presence became more intense. The house seemed to vibrate with a dark energy. I could hear her faint, desperate whispers, see her face pressed against every window in the house. I found myself drawn to the garden, the overgrown space seeming to beckon to me. Following a trail of rusted hinges and broken branches, I found the well. It was a dark, gaping maw, the water within utterly black. It was then I saw the blood. A dark, viscous stain snaked down the side of the well, creeping onto the grass and into the earth. Terror seized me. My heart thrummed against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence of the night. The whispers intensified, the words becoming clear, desperate. "Help me, get me out! Something snapped inside me. I couldn't just stand and watch. I had to do something. I felt a chilling sense of purpose, like the girl's desperate plea had infused me with a resolve I didn't know I possessed. Using a rusty, discarded shovel I found leaning against the wall, I started to dig. It was hard work, the soil cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of decay. With every shovelful, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. I could feel Alara's desperate energy swirling around me, a chilling communion of fear and despair. Eventually, I reached the water. It was cold, shockingly so, and it reeked of something foul. I peered into the darkness, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the murky depths, were glimpses of bone and hair, swirling with the fall water. It was as if the well held a swirling vortex of sorrow and tragedy. Then I saw her. Alara. Her skin was ashen, her hair matted and dark. She floated just below the surface, her vacant eyes fixed on me. She wasn't the gaunt, fragile child I had seen at the window. She was something broken, something twisted. She reached out, her hand pale and spectral, her fingers long and bony. The water around her churned with dark energy, and a scream, a guttural, raw sound, ripped from her silent form. It felt like the whole house shuddered as the sound echoed through the gardens. The blood, it was everywhere. Not just on the well's surface, but swirling through the black water, coating Alara's form. It painted the darkness a grotesque shade of crimson. Then she spoke. Her voice, a hollow rasp, filled the night. "You thought you could help me? You thought you could save me?" She lunged, a terrifying, spectral form, her hand reaching for me. I recoiled, stumbling back in horror. "I'm not here to help," she seethed, her voice a chilling whisper that seemed to travel directly into my soul. "I'm here to take." She grabbed my arm, her icy grip instantly piercing my skin. A searing pain shot through my body, her spectral fingers digging into my flesh. In that moment, I knew there was no escape. Alara's grip tightened, and I felt a cold darkness spreading through my veins. With a final, blood-curdling shriek, my body convulsed, then went limp. The darkness of the well consumed me, the crimson water swallowing my screams, the silent echo of Alara's triumphant laughter, the final chilling sound in the night. Mrs. Whitaker found me the next morning. My body, drained of all color, lay in the overgrown garden next to the well, a grotesque testament to Alara's thirst for vengeance. Alara was gone, her spectral form absorbed back into the darkness. But a horrifying legacy remained. The stain of blood, and the chilling whisper of a girl trapped between worlds, forever bound to the house. The whisper that would echo in the very walls, for eternity. My foster room had strange markings on the wall, like words scraped into the paint but long faded. They were subtle, almost ghost-like, as if someone had tried to erase them with time and desperate scrubbing. I couldn't make out the words clearly, but they were there, etched into the pale yellow walls, a constant, unsettling presence. It was as if the room itself held a secret, a whisper of a story it desperately wanted to tell. I arrived at the foster home a few weeks prior, a scared, confused teenager adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Mr. Henderson, my foster father, was a tall, imposing man with eyes that held a perpetual, unnerving calmness. He was always polite, always attentive, yet there was an underlying chill in his demeanor that made my skin crawl. Mrs. Caldwell, his wife, was a ghost of a woman, seldom seen or heard, shrouded in a perpetual silence that was almost as chilling as her husband's calm. The house itself was a Victorian monstrosity, creaking and groaning under the weight of its age. It stood on a hill overlooking a desolate stretch of land, isolated from the rest of the town. The windows were perpetually fogged, casting the interior in a perpetual twilight, and the air within always felt thick with an unseen, oppressive presence. The strange markings on the wall of my room were the first sign that something was amiss. It was a recurring unease, a feeling that I was not alone in the house, that unseen eyes were always watching me. I tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as a product of my own troubled mind, but the whisper of the house, the constant chill, and the faded markings refused to be ignored. Then came the night the words reappeared. I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, the oppressive silence of the house pressing down on me like a physical weight. The moonlight, filtering through the grimy windowpane, cast long, distorted shadows across the room, making the familiar objects seem alien and threatening. And then I saw it. A faint, scratching sound, like fingernails on a chalkboard, cut through the stillness. My eyes snapped open, drawn to the wall opposite my bed. And there, in the pale moonlight, I watched as new scratches appeared in the paint, forming words that sent a shiver of ice down my spine. Get out. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor with a dull thud. The words seemed to glow faintly, a malevolent inscription in the silent room. I stared at them, frozen in place, my mind reeling. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a childish act of vandalism. This was something else, something sinister and terrifying. I stumbled out of my room and down the hallway to Mr. Henderson's study. He was hunched over his desk, a book open in front of him, his face illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp. I knocked timidly, my voice a barely audible whisper. He looked up, his eyes still and unreadable, and a faint, almost imperceptible, smile touched his lips. Yes, Michael? The room. I stammered, unable to articulate the sheer terror that gripped my heart. The wall, there are words. He rose from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he had a lifetime to spare. He approached me, his smile widening into something predatory. Words, you say? Kids will be kids, Michael. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. His words were laced with a casual cruelty that sent a fresh wave of fear through me. But they weren't there before, I insisted, my voice trembling. They appeared, they're new. He leaned closer, his breath warm and stale against my ear. Perhaps you're imagining things, Michael. We all do sometimes, when we're young and scared. He patted my shoulder with a heavy hand, and I recoiled, a shudder running through me. Go back to bed now. It's late. I fled back to my room, the unnerving calmness of his voice ringing in my ears. I couldn't sleep. The words on the wall, "Get out," were etched in my mind, a relentless mantra of fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The next few days were a blur of unease and dread. I tried to ignore the markings, to convince myself that it was all in my head, but the tension in the house was palpable. Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Caldwell's behavior became increasingly erratic, their smiles strained and artificial, their eyes holding a disturbing emptiness. They seemed to be observing me, analyzing me, their silence heavy with a suppressed malice. I started noticing other strange things. Whispers in the empty hallways, footsteps in the dead of night, a metallic scent that lingered in the air, particularly near my room. The house was alive, and it was not friendly. One evening, I found a hidden compartment within an old wardrobe in the hallway. Inside, I found a dusty, leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with a scrawling script, a patchwork of desperate entries written in shaking hands. It was the diary of a previous foster child, a boy named Thomas. Thomas's story mirrored my own experience. The strange markings, the whispers, the unnerving behavior of the Hendersons. He had also seen the get out message before it appeared in my room. But it was his final entries that chilled me to the bone. He spoke of nightmares, of feeling watched, of a constant dread that followed him through the halls. He described growing increasingly paranoid, convinced that the Hendersons were not who they seemed. He wrote of hearing voices, of a growing sense of madness that took root in his mind. The final entry was a frantic plea. "They're going to do it tonight. I can feel it. I can hear them whispering. They want to. I don't know what they want. I just know I need to get out. But I can't. They won't let me. They're waiting in the dark. Get out. I need to get out, before it's too late." The journal ended abruptly. My breath hitched in my throat, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. Thomas's fate was unknown, but the implications were horrifying. I understood now. I understood what the house whispered, what the faded markings represented. The Hendersons were not foster parents. They were something else, something sinister. Panic seized me. I had to escape. I had to get out of that house before it was too late. That night, I packed a small bag, my hands trembling as I shoved a few essentials inside. My heart pounded like a war drum in my chest as I crept through the house, careful not to make a sound. Each creak of the floorboards, each groan of the ancient house, filled me with a chilling sense of dread. I made my way to the kitchen, hoping to find something to defend myself with. My eyes fell upon a heavy butcher knife, its blade gleaming ominously under the dim light. I snatched it up, my grip constricting around the handle. I moved to the back door, my hand hovering over the knob. At that moment I heard it, the distant sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching the kitchen. My blood ran cold. It was them. They knew. I darted out the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran, as fast as my legs could carry me, without looking back. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of pursuit, the thumping of feet on the gravel path, and the chillingly calm voice of Mr. Henderson, calling my name. "Michael!" he roared, his voice laced with a chilling mix of disappointment and fury. "Where do you think you're going?" I ran blindly, through the moonlit fields, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming in protest. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. I ran until my legs wouldn't carry me any further, collapsing on the damp earth, the butcher knife clutched tightly in my hand. I lay there, gasping for breath, the image of the chilling, "Get out" message and the desperate plea in Thomas's journal burned into my mind. I didn't know where I was going or what the future held. But I knew one thing for certain: I was free. I was finally free from the House of Whispers, the House of Horrors, and the sinister intentions of Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Caldwell. And I prayed, with a desperate hope that no other child would ever have to experience the terror that haunted the walls of that house. The terror that whispered, "Get out!" before it was too late. When I moved into my last foster home, I noticed a family portrait on the wall, but something was off. One of the faces was blurred, as though scratched out from within the photo. That night, I heard scratching sounds in the hallway, and when I looked at the portrait again, I saw my own face had started to blur. It was a large, ornate Victorian house, the kind that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Mrs. Henderson, my new foster mother, was a woman of quiet smiles and even quieter pronouncements. She had a way of making me feel both welcome and utterly out of place, as if I was a guest in a play she'd already rehearsed 1,000 times. The house itself was a labyrinth of creaking floorboards and dusty, unused rooms. The family portrait hung in the hallway, a faded relic of a happier time, or so I assumed. The man and woman in the picture were stiffly posed, smiles plastered on their faces, a forced cheerfulness that felt chilling rather than warm. Their 2 children were also present, a boy and a girl, their faces crisp and clear. Except for one, a young girl with a face that was smudged, as if someone had taken a finger and rubbed it across the photo, erasing her from existence. The first night was uneventful, aside from the house settling around me with a chorus of groans and pops. But then, the scratching started. It was a low, insistent sound from the hallway, a scraping against the old wooden floorboards that sent shivers down my spine. It was like nails on a chalkboard, amplified 1,000 times, and it came in irregular bursts, as if something was desperately trying to claw its way out of the walls. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was just the house settling, the wind whistling through a loose window pane. But it persisted. And then I saw it. When I glanced back at the portrait, the edges of my face, in the reflection of the glass, seemed to be losing their sharpness, becoming cloudy at the edges, like the blurred face of the girl in the picture. Fear coiled in my stomach, a cold, icy snake. I was convinced it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, the result of a sleepless night and a haunted house. But the scratching grew louder each night, more insistent, and the blurring in the portrait intensified. It was like a slow, agonizing erasure, my own face slowly fading from the world. The scratching became a constant presence, a background rhythm to my existence. It would start softly, a whisper in the darkness, before building to a crescendo of frantic clawing sounds so intense I could feel the vibrations through the floorboards. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, scrambling to look at the portrait. And each time, the blurring was worse. My features, once distinct, were starting to disappear, replaced by a ghostly white haze. I begged Mrs. Henderson to explain the blurred face, but she only offered a frail smile and said it was just an old photo, faded with time. Her words were hollow, her eyes filled with a strange sorrow I couldn't understand. One particularly terrifying night the scratching stopped. The silence was deafening, more terrifying than the sounds it replaced. I tiptoed to the portrait, my breath held in my chest. There, my face was almost completely obscured, a mere sliver of my features remaining amidst the whitewash. And the girl's face, the one that had been blurred all along? It had shifted. It was as if her features were slowly morphing, becoming more defined, clearer, while mine faded. It was then that I started to piece things together. The other foster children who had lived in the house before me. The whispers I'd overheard, the hushed tones and averted gazes of the people who lived on the street. I started to find old, tattered photos hidden in the attic, pictures of children who had resided in this house with faces that slowly disappeared in much the same way mine was. The scratching started again, but this time it was accompanied by a low, guttural moan. For a moment I saw a flash of the girl's face in my reflection, her eyes filled with a chilling emptiness. She wasn't just blurred, she was trapped. And she was taking me with her. The nights became a living nightmare. I was trapped in a house where the walls themselves were breathing, a house where the past refused to stay buried. The scratching grew more intense, the sounds becoming a symphony of terror that echoed through the halls. And every night, I saw my face fade a little more, the girl's face emerging from the shadows, claiming the vacant space within the portrait. One night, I found an old, yellowed diary tucked away in a forgotten drawer. It was the diary of one of the former foster children, a young girl named Lily. Her words, written in shaky handwriting, revealed a chilling truth. The house was cursed. It fed on the innocence of the children who lived there, consuming their life force, their identity, their very essence. Lily had talked about the scratching, the blurring, the feeling of being watched, consumed. She had documented the slowly encroaching dread, the horrifying sensation of her own face fading from existence. And she'd written of the girl in the portrait, a creature of shadows and whispers who existed beyond the boundaries of life and death. The creature that devoured those who crossed its threshold. Terror consumed me. I wasn't just a foster child, I was a meal. The house had claimed me as its own. The girl in the photo, the blurred, spectral figure, was both my tormentor and my reflection. My own face was almost completely gone. Only my eyes remained, staring back at me from the portrait, pools of terror in a sea of white. The scratching echoed throughout the house, like an orchestra of death playing its final, haunting melody. Panic seized me. I had to escape. I had to get out before the house fully consumed me, before the last remnants of my face disappeared, leaving only a blank canvas for the girl to inhabit. I stumbled through the house, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Everything was blurry, the walls seeming to close in on me. I ran through the hallway, the scratching growing louder, the girl's presence a palpable chill behind me. I burst through the front door, fleeing into the night. I ran, my lungs burning, my legs aching, ignoring the pain. I never looked back. I don't know how I got away. I don't know what happened to Mrs. Henderson. The house, with its secrets and horrors, remained behind me. I never went back. The memory of the scratching, the blurring, the girl's silent gaze still haunts me. I still see the portrait in my dreams, my face fading, the girl's face slowly taking its place. It's a constant reminder of the terror I faced, the house that fed on children, the price of innocence. And sometimes, when the wind whispers through the trees, I still hear the scratching, a chilling reminder that the house is still there, waiting, still hungry. And I know, somewhere deep within the confines of that ancient home, the girl in the portrait still waits, her blurred face slowly becoming clearer, forever consuming those who dare to enter its shadowed halls.